All right, good afternoon. My name is Deborah Jackson, and I serve as the managing director for the Center for Law, Equity, and Race. Welcome, welcome. We have been joined by our faculty co-directors. I think she may have stepped down. So we have Professor Deborah Ramirez, who directs the Criminal Justice Task Force, and earlier in the room we had Professor Margaret Burnham, who does the Civil Rights and Restorative Justice project. So the topic of today's discussion is the role of lived experience in making change. And I'm going to introduce the moderator, who is known to some but not all, Professor Michael Melsner, who is currently retired, but he has a very long and storied career, starting back in the 1960s, where he worked with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and represented clients such as Muhammad Ali, as well as numerous prisoners on death row. When he was 26 years old, he argued a capital case before the Supreme Court. Has written many books. What I found interesting is that he's also written a play in 2011 about Guantanamo, entitled "In Our Name: A Play of Torture of the Tortured Years." He has been described as the principal architect of the death penalty abolition movement in the United States and has traveled widely, teaching broadly, and we're so happy that he has rejoined us today for this event. He will introduce our speaker, Kenneth Hartman. Professor Nelson.
Please shout if you can't hear me back there. Sometimes my voice gets lower. Just a preliminary, we're going to have a little book lottery at the end. If you want to participate, write your name and stick a little piece of paper in that bag in the corner of the first row. I thought I would be talking to hundreds of people who never heard of Ken Hartman. Well, I think anybody in this room, almost anybody in this room, could probably introduce him. So it's very strange. I feel like throwing my papers away, but I will repeat things that many of you know. But I want to start in a kind of quirky way, the way I sometimes did as a clinical teacher when I started legal education. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and think about whether you have ever, the last time, if ever, you have changed your basic approach to your life. It won't last long, nobody will get hurt. Close your eyes and think about that just for a while. Okay. Well, as many of you know, that's really what Ken has done in a remarkable way. After serving 37 years in California prisons, every time I read that number, I kind of know that can't be the case. But it is until Jerry Brown commuted his sentence in 2017, right? Ken was in and out of jails and prisons from 13 to 19, and he had an awakening. He indicates I'll just give you one little example of how his awakening took place. It was in reading. Can you imagine that? Do our students read anymore? They look at phones. Do you read on phone? Okay, so Ken has, of course, in prison, founded the Honor Yard, which implemented a nonviolent and anti-racist model of incarceration. I don't think it takes much imagination to understand how difficult it would be to organize something like that in a prison environment. He also organized an approach to LWOP while in prison, the other death penalty. And he's now, as you mostly know, the executive director of Transformative Programming Works. Where did you get that title? I'm really going to tell you or remind you that he's also a award-winning author, and he doesn't just write books. He is written in the Times and Harper's and other periodicals. So it's your turn.
Thank you, Michael. The last time I did something with Michael, I felt embarrassed after he was talking like someone who's kind of a living legend, and talking about me. I thought was, feel pretty good about that, and I just want to say thank you again, Michael.
Emphasize the living.
I did it. I said living first, so not just any legend, but a living legend. So, yeah. So the title of this presentation is "The Role of Lived Experience in Making Change," and by that I mean lived experience of doing time in prison or time anywhere. I guess in California we say you have direct experience if you did any time anywhere. You have direct experience. And let's see, one of these is going to make it go, I hope. So far, no. Let me think here. Oh, there it goes. I made it work. It's not my computer. So I start with this picture right here. I just want to be really clear. I was in prison for 38 years. I did not sit in my cell and stare at the floor very often, but there was a filming done of, resolved around the honor program in Lancaster called Toe Tag Parole. It showed on HBO. I was featured in it, and so was my daughter. And this is a photograph they took to promote the documentary. And they said, "We really think you should look pensive and look down." And I said, okay. I didn't generally look pensive and look down, frankly. It's kind of not my nature, but it is a picture. That's what my cell looked like. And in the background, you can see a picture of me with my daughter, who I love very much. And she comes from a conjugal visit, which they then had in California. So the picture on your left, I guess, that is me at Zuma Beach in California. In California, when you get out of prison, it's kind of like traditional. You go to the Pacific Ocean and you have to stand in the ocean. Probably don't do that in a lot of other places. I don't know if you stand in the Atlantic here in Massachusetts when you get out, but in California, everybody goes to the ocean, and that's what we do. And that's me on the day that I got paroled, December 20th, 2017, after about 37 plus years. And the other picture on the other end, that is my daughter, Aaliyah. She works for a nonprofit in San Francisco. She was conceived on the grounds of a maximum security prison, which I told her would have been a great first line for a college essay, but she didn't use it. So she was like, "I'm not using that, Dad." But, and of course, that's me since I've been out. And the reason I'm showing you these pictures is I just want to sort of give you a sense of the life that I have before I talk about the other things. But so I've had a long affiliation with UCLA. A law professor at UCLA I'm very close to named Sharon Dolovich. We used to write together while I was in prison. And she would often say, I don't know about the slides on Zoom. I don't know enough about Zoom to answer that question. But I think maybe if you put your screen in gallery mode, I think it might be one of the screens. They asked me if I wanted to help create this event at UCLA called Connecting Art and Law for Liberation. I did. That's the first one, and that is me reading from my book at the event. That's a close-up of me reading from my book at the event. And it was a great time. I really enjoyed it. I love speaking to people. I love talking in front of audiences. Well, that was supposed to be a different picture, but if you could see that picture, it's a kind of blurry picture of me at an event at Ford Theater in Los Angeles introducing a rock band. And the rock band, actually, the reason I'm doing that is they were there to promote prison reform and get people to donate money to organizations that do prison reform work. And I was there introducing them. It's a cool picture if you actually could see it. And because I love prisons so much, I travel around the world to see prisons. And that is me going to Norway, and that is me going to Finland, two of the countries I've gone to visit their prison systems to see how people do prisons differently in the world. You probably may all know, but if you don't, the Scandinavians are considered to have kind of the gold standard for incarceration in the world. They're still prisons, people still can't leave. It's not like they're paradise or something, but compared to American prisons, they are quite a bit better. And that's me at UCLA very recently. That was right around Valentine's Day. The tall guy next to me, we did time together. We were on a panel talking about what it's like to come back from prison. If him, me, the young lady, and the guy on the far end, we all did time. All of us were lifers at one point. We're all out. And the woman on this end in the dress, that's Sharon Dolovich, who's my friend at UCLA. She's a tenured law professor there. She runs the Prison Policy Institute for UCLA Law School. That's how I know her. She's been involved in trying to make the prison system more rational for a pretty long time, and I have a lot of respect for her. And we did a panel. So that was at an event there. Okay, so just really quickly, who am I? I was actually born in Boston a long time ago. And when I was 19 years old, I was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. I killed a man named Thomas Allen Fellows in a fist fight in a park in Long Beach, California. I really did that. I was not innocent, something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. It's important that I say his name. He was a real human being, and I took his life. I ultimately spent almost 38 years in prison. It's a couple months short. I just say 38 years because I feel like I've earned that. I'm also a father. You saw a picture of my daughter. Currently, I am the executive director of an organization called Transformative Programming Works. We inherited the name, Michael. It was Transformative In-Prison Work Group. So this is actually easier to say, the new one. Like when we first got it, I would say that and people would be like halfway into it. What did you just say? So I'm also an author, written a couple of books, I've written a lot of articles, been published in a lot of places. I haven't done a lot of writing since I got out of prison because I tell people all the time, the only thing I miss about prison is free time. And out here, not a lot of free time and have a lot of jobs and a lot of work. And I'm a speaker, and I'm going to get some water before I stop speaking. I need that, okay. So when we talk about the idea of lived experience and making change, what is the problem that we're talking about? And first time I've ever tried to do this, I used Google's system of, you can tell it to generate images. And I said, what if you give me a prison in a black hole? I thought that was pretty good, actually. I was like, that kind of looks like a prison in a black hole. And the reason I use that image is because prisons exist in a kind of negative space, and most people don't know what goes on inside a prison because information can't get out. It can get out to some degree, but it's limited. It's very difficult to get images out. It's very difficult to get people to hear what's happening inside. I don't know how it is here in Massachusetts, but in California, the press is not allowed to come into the prison and interview people specifically. They do allow the press in on very limited sort of guided tours where they always go to the places that look the least bad, shockingly. And they always talk to the people most likely to say that everything is wonderful, shockingly too. So the problem is that this black hole exists of information, and people on the outside, often well-meaning, good people who want to try to make things better, they come up with ideas of what they think would make things better, but they don't really know what actually goes on inside a prison. So they come up with ideas. In California at one point, a well-meaning group of people, they designed what they would make, kind of what they were calling like a special programming facility or something like that. And it had people going in and out of the central gate to go to all these different classes and work assignments. And anyone who has done time in a prison knows going in and out of the central gate is a real processing problem. They had people going in and out like 10 times in one day. And I remember when I read it, I said, there's no possible way this would ever work in a real prison. It might work in a junior high school somewhere, but it's not going to work in a prison where every time you go through that gate, you got to get processed, you got to get searched. The officers would go, we're not going to do that. And of course, they did implement it in a prison that lasted about 30 days. So, you know, it's a good example of sort of like, it would have been a great program. I'm sure it would have been a great program, but it was just impossible to run in a prison, particularly in California. So I think, I hope I didn't just miss something. Nope, I didn't. I like this cartoon only because just it appealed to me in the sense of who are the people that are sitting at the table making these decisions, particularly in nonprofit world. And they tend to be rich people, and they tend to be white people too. You know, so who's at the table? Rich people, white people. Then there's also people that we call saviors, you know, the people that are going to come in and save everybody, and they have this great idea, and this is what's going to fix everything, and once people listen to this, prisons will be fixed tomorrow. And of course, that never happens. They're often very nice people. I know many of them personally. I think they're lovely, but their ideas don't make any sense and doesn't work. They get disillusioned and they leave. There's also a lot of people come in that are kind of appear to me to be not entirely mentally well balanced. We call them cranks. There are sometimes people at the table who really are punishers, and they really are finding ways to sort of insert themselves into the movement to try to make things better. But what they really want to do is they want to make things worse and harder for people. And then I think also there are people who are allies, and I put that in quotes, because sometimes our allies are not our allies, they're kind of our enemies, not because they want to be, but because they just have trouble understanding things, I think. And again, I say all these things from the perspective of how do we incorporate lived experience into the idea of change? And those people all have these seats at the table, and it's kind of like a weird game of like, you know, who gets the last chair? So somebody has to give up a chair, and trying to figure out who's going to give up a chair so that people like me, who did time, who actually do understand how prison works. I'm not saying I'm the final expert on everything. I don't think I am. But I am more of an expert on how prisons work than most other people. So I think people like me, and I think it's important to state this, I probably should have said this at the outset, but obviously I'm a white man, so I'm not the majority of people getting out of prison. Majority of people getting out of prison don't look like me. But I also was in prison, so I feel like there's a balance of reality. So we're talking about what is the approach to try to make this happen. In California, we have created this organization called the Transformative Programming Works Organization, which had a different name a long time ago. When it got started, it was created by people who ran in-prison rehabilitative programs. The people who ran these in-prison rehabilitative programs were nice people. They were allies. They wanted to make things better. And one of the things they did that I think was very far-seeing, and I appreciate them for this, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, they said to themselves, we really can't make this thing work if we don't have people with lived experience at the table, which is how I ended up coming into this organization. They created something called a leadership team, which was all people who had done time. I was on the leadership team. And ultimately they said, you know, we think that it would make sense if you guys actually were the ones to become the leaders of this organization. And at the time, there were 16 organizations that had created this little body. This is a picture from last year's convening, and you're looking at several hundred years of accumulated prison time, possibly 1,000 years. I haven't done the math. Everyone in that picture are people who all did time. Many of the people in that picture now run organizations that are in this collective. The collective went from 16 organizations to 106 as of last time I checked. I'm the executive director. The board is primarily people who did time. And we do have people who did not do time too, because again, I don't believe that I'm the final knowledgeable person on everything. But we wanted to have an organization that's actually led by lived experience, and that people who want to be a part of this have to recognize that lived experience deserves a seat at the table. And again, everybody in that picture did time to one degree or another. Some people did like more time than me, not many, but some people did more time than me, but everyone did time. And those are all people that have leadership roles, facilitator roles. They are a part of what's being done to make things better in California. And I think we've made pretty good progress on a lot of fronts. So we want to change the landscape. How do we change the landscape? And I think the first and foremost, I think, is we have to look people in the face and say, it's our story. It isn't your story, it's our story. Again, even people who mean well, even people who want to make the world better, which I respect that, and want people like that to be a part of what we're doing, but it is our story. We're the people who did time. We actually know what goes on in there. We know what happens. You know, I think if we're going to do that, we call them claim jumpers and posers. And these are people who sometimes will actually say they did time when they didn't really do time, which we've actually run into a few people like that, where you find out later on, like, where did you do time at? Well, you know, it's like, well, that actually isn't a jail. I'm not sure how that counts. You know, and then, the next one, I'm in academia right now, so I'm sorry if I say this, but sometimes academia has a tendency to sort of come at this from a way that makes those of us who are in prison go, what in the hell are they talking about? And again, I'm sure everyone in this room is fabulous and wonderful, but some people in academia, I think, just don't really understand what they're talking about. And I think we have to be aware that there's going to be setbacks. And that means that sometimes what we're trying to do isn't going to be accomplished. People are going to say, nope, we don't want to do that. And we'll have to regroup and start over. In California, fairly recently, there's been a couple of setbacks, mostly because the media and police unions got together to make it look like every CVS in America was being attacked by a horde that was stealing everything. I live in California. I've never seen any of those hordes personally, but supposedly they were everywhere. And I also think, you know, and for those of us who did time, particularly those of us who did a long time in prison, you know, nothing worthwhile is easy. You know, sometimes it's hard and it takes time and it takes work, and we have to sit down with people that we may not want to sit down with. I was talking earlier today, I sit down with the California Correctional Peace Officers Association. I have lunch with their representatives fairly regularly in Sacramento. They're not our allies, but they're not our enemies either. They don't have to be. They're people that work inside prisons, and I think if we believe that all human beings should be treated like human beings, that includes them. And I think I've made progress talking with them and meeting with them. At this point, they haven't formally announced it, but I think they're going to support the budget ask that we have in the legislature in California right now, which is asking for $20 million for our member organizations to do another year of good programming work, which would be the fourth time that we've asked for this and got money. And, you know, and again, the old guard has to make space. It just means that people that have been in this space who didn't make the kind of change that needed to happen, I think some of them have to finally go, you know, maybe it's time for us to retire or move on, or again, here's a chair you could sit in because we think maybe you might be able to do a better job potentially. And again, when, you know, the solution, what is the solution to this? This is one of my favorite pictures. You'll see a couple more of my favorite pictures. But so the woman in the magenta outfit, she's a California Assembly member. Her name is Mia Bonta. Her husband is the Attorney General of California now. He used to have her seat when he moved into being the Attorney General. He said, you're going to get the better Bonta. And I like Rob Bonta. He's a lovely man, but she is amazing. This woman is like unbelievable. She's from Oakland. She has a lot of knowledge of incarceration. She has a lot of, maybe no direct experience, but she definitely has some indirect experience, and she's definitely system impacted. And then the woman standing next to her with the glasses on, she's an executive director of one of our member organizations. She never did time herself, but she has family experience of incarceration. Every one of the rest of the people in that circle all did time. And that was when we first got a law passed that made the ability of people to go in and provide programs inside prison much more powerful, much more able to happen. And it was a big change in the way people would be processed. Clearances would become easier to get. And most importantly, clearances for formerly incarcerated people would be able to be gotten more easily, because there had been a lot of resistance to, like, can formerly incarcerated people come back into prison to run programs? The last time we had a hearing on this at the California Assembly, a man named Tom Lackey, and I should have put his picture in here. I wish I would have now that I'm thinking about it. But he's a retired California highway patrolman. He's a conservative Republican. He stood up and said, we need to put more money into programs that involve formerly incarcerated people. Because he and I have been talking, and several of others, not just me personally, several of us have been talking with him for the last couple of years. And he fully understands that the people who have the best likelihood of being able to talk to people in prison are people who were in prison. kind of like the AA model. You know, like if you're an alcoholic, talk to another alcoholic. I'm a recovering alcoholic myself. I believe that I know how to talk to other alcoholics. And I listen to other alcoholics when they talk about alcohol. He's like, when you're talking about prison, we should talk to people who've been in prison. And this last budget asked, the one that's in right now, the two retired law enforcement people that are in the assembly, both Republicans, both conservatives, both signed on to support that budget ask. So I think it's important that we sort of reach out to both sides. But anyways, I like this picture because it just highlights, you know, what we were doing and how it's been working. And that was when we got that bill was passed. It was signed into law. It was signed by the governor, and it made California probably the most liberal state in the country as far as allowing formerly incarcerated people into prison to do work in prisons, to be able to be there, get in, and not be, you know, they had erected so many barriers it was virtually impossible to get in, and that changed things overnight. So, you know, when we're looking at this again, you know, the idea of, you know, how do we empower direct experience? You know, we have to sit down with our allies and we have to make demands. We have to say, you guys have to give us a room at the table. You have to sit, you have to make space for us. And not everybody wants to do that. A lot of people don't want to do that. A lot of people are very resentful. We've had people who are like, we can't have anybody in this organization that doesn't have a college degree. And we're like, that seems unfair. Most people in prison don't have, you know, a high school degree some places, so that doesn't mean they don't know what happens in prison. And it means sometimes we have to be difficult. And there have been multiple occasions where I've had arguments with people where it's been very unpleasant, and I've had to say, I don't agree with your position. Your position blocks us out from being able to participate in this. And, you know, and the other thing you'll get is you're going to be guilt tripped over and over and over again. And that comes often from our allies too. You know, it's like, but we've done so much work for you. You know, we need you to come to this event and speak. And we're paying these two college professors to speak, but we really can't pay you. And we're like, so we're not going to go to that anymore when we do that. And we've told people that, like, and we kind of have a policy in California. We have a policy now with everybody we've talked to, which is like, if you're going to put me on a panel, I better be paid the same as everybody else on the panel, or I wouldn't. Why am I on the panel? You know. So, and some people have stopped inviting me to panels. Well, that's all right. I can live with that. But other people pay. You know, I mean, again, if it's a panel and people are being paid, we should all be paid. And just because you were in prison doesn't mean that you somehow don't deserve to be paid to be on the panel. And there are people who really seem to believe that. Well, you know, you were in prison. The other thing is, and this is for people who did time will understand this. You know, we have to leave prison politics inside. You know, when we work with people now that maybe in prison we wouldn't have been friends with, you know, for a variety of different reasons. But they were people who did time. We have to leave the prison politics back inside the prison and work with each other on the outside. And we have to build our own networks and our own connections with people. You know, we have to create a system where we have friends, we have people that we can reach out to when we need them. I reach out to Sharon Dolovich all the time at UCLA. We're good friends. She's somebody we can count on, and among others, you know. And I think the last thing that I would say on that one is that, you know, there's a tendency in situations like this where you end up with 3 or 4 superstars that everybody wants to talk to. And like, we got to fix that. And you know, when I first got out, I started going around doing speaking at colleges. This is before the pandemic. And I was in New York and I spoke to like 4 different colleges and I was getting paid pretty well to do it. And I thought, oh, this is great. I could just do this for the rest of my life, and I can be like a college speaker. And then I realized that was probably not a good idea. But more important, I realized that other people need to be heard as well. So I worked really hard to get other people into the spotlight as well, to get people who just got out. I've now been out 7 years, going on 8 years. So what's happening in prison today isn't what was happening when I was in prison. So I think we have to constantly be bringing new people in who got out more recently so they can have an opportunity to present what's actually happening in prison today. Because prison evolves constantly and changes too. So what is happening in California? So California has, the Governor Newsom has decided he's going to implement what he calls the California model. The California model is based on the Scandinavian model. The Scandinavian model was pretty much created in Norway. It is a different way of running prisons. It's based on a few pretty basic concepts. Normalization, which is try to make the experience of a person in prison be as much like a normal experience of anyone else in the world as possible. It also is based on what they call dynamic security, which is a fancy way of saying treat people around you like fellow human beings and talk to them and have conversations with them. People, when I went to Norway the first time, I've been there 3 times to tour their prisons, and there's an organization named Amend, A-M-E-N-D. I'm an Amend ambassador, which basically means that I did time and they taught me what goes on in Norway so I could talk to California officials and say, this would work in our prisons too. But the first time I went there, there's an officer, one of the Norwegian officers, he's walking us around and I hear him talking to the folks inside in Norwegian. And I asked him, how is he referring to them? And he said, well, I'm calling them, by their first names, whatever that might be. And I said, well, what do they call you? And he says, they call me by my name. And I was like, thinking about that. I asked him a second time, because I wasn't sure we really connected directly. Like, do they call you by your first name? And he goes, yeah, they call me by my name. I did ask him a third time because I still wasn't 100% sure. And he looked at me and he says, you must not be able to understand well. They call me by my name. What else would they call me? And this is a big deal for those of us who've done time, because in most places I've ever been, you could not call Officer John Smith John. You could call him Officer Smith, or you could call him Officer, but you couldn't call him John. And in Norway, they call each other by their names, by their actual normal given names. And I think that's a huge way of humanizing the experience. I think that has a big part of it. It's when you walk into the housing units in Norway, you'll see the officers sitting down at the table and they're actually eating with the people that live there. They're actually playing cards with them. They're sitting around talking. There's a position called a contact officer, and every person in prison has a contact officer. And the contact officer is someone who meets with you regularly to ask you, how are you doing? What's going on in your life? Is everything okay? Is there any problems you're having? The idea of it being to humanize the people inside, where then have them have someone that they can talk to. And dynamic security, instead of working on the idea that we'll build hard barriers, it's built on the idea that they'll get to know you. And if I come walking out of my cell and I'm obviously angry, they'll go, Ken looks angry today. Maybe we should find out what's going on with Ken. Instead of, we're going to stand off here to the side and wait to see something bad happen, and then we'll rush in with pepper spray and all the other stuff that they do. And when I was in a chow hall there in Finland, and I was talking to the chief of security at the Finnish prison where we were at, and this was a maximum security prison, I said, like, how many incidents of violence do you have regularly, in a month? And he goes, none. And I said, what about in the last year? And then they turned and they started talking to each other in Finnish, which is a completely incomprehensible language to me. And in fact, the guy who introduced himself, when he said his name, he said, don't try to pronounce it, it's hard for us to. So they came back to me and they said, we had a fist fight about 2.5 years ago. And I'm thinking, in a California prison, you have a fist fight pretty much every day, and among many other things, fairly regularly. So they've managed the system that they've implemented. It isn't perfect, and again, I'm not saying that it somehow makes prison a good place. Prison's a bad place, but it makes it less bad, I would say. And they certainly have created a system that empowers human beings to feel like human beings and to be treated like human beings. And in my mind, that too is a good and useful thing. I really don't think we should have people being treated like animals, like somehow that's a good idea. So that is another gathering. And in that gathering, 2/3 of the people in that picture did time, about 1/3 did not do time. The people that did not do time are primarily from an organization that's based in Europe. So we've worked with an international funder. We created something called Justice Reinvented in California. It's a collective of organizations. There's 6 of us, so we're all kind of in different pieces of the puzzle, so to speak. And we're all working together, like, how can we create like energy between these different organizations to make positive change more deeply rooted and more durable in the California prison system. And that is a meeting we had at a place called Amity in California. What was that? No, that's Amity in Los Angeles. And it is a reentry organization, and that's sort of like their big meeting room, and we rented the space to have the meeting there. And like I say, about 2/3 of the people there did time, and about 1/3 did not. but we're working to try to make things different. And then transformative programming works. I already told you about the leadership team. And just to give you like a deeper history of that. So I come on to the leadership team, and the first thing I say to the very well-meaning organizers who are professional nonprofit people is I say, so what do we actually do? What does transformative in-prison work group actually do? Well, they have a lot of committees, it turns out. And I say, what do the committees do? Well, they meet. And I said, what comes out of the meetings? And they go, well, they identify problems and they talk about, how things are. And I was like, and I kept saying, like, so what does that do? And ultimately what happens is they say, would you like to work for Transformative In-Prison Work Group? And maybe we could come up with some ideas. So I became their advocacy person, and I went to Sacramento and I started meeting with the legislature, and I met with organizations that were part of TPW, and I said, what do you guys need? And they're like, well, we need funding to do programs. That's what we need. So that's what we do. We look for funding. And we brought in $53 million over the past 3 years. We should be bringing $73 million starting in a couple of months when we get another $20 million. Prior to that was like maybe $3 or $4 million coming out of the CDCR for programs. So we brought in like orders of magnitude more funding. We also changed the policies, like I told you, we changed the policies about clearance. And I think a more important thing is, I think there's people out there who wants to come in. Come on in. We changed the meaning of prison in California. I think this is like a really fundamental and important thing. The California legislature, during the bad years of prison, back in the 80s and 90s, had found that the purpose of prison was punishment, period. That was the purpose of prison in California. So we got a law passed, signed by the governor, that says the punishment aspect of incarceration is satisfied by the sentence, period. The purpose of imprisonment is rehabilitation, preparation for reentry, blah, 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 little line of things. And we also stated in there that the importance of community-based organizations is central to achieving rehabilitation and preparation for reentry. So what we did was we changed how prison is supposed to operate. Did that change how prison operated the next day? No. Has it changed prison operates how much in the past couple of years? Not a lot, but I always see these kind of things, it's a lever to try to build things up to the next thing. So what we hope to do is use that lever to encourage other things to happen down the road. And I think when you're changing an organization like the California Department of Corrections, which is a $14 billion a year operation with over 100,000 people incarcerated, it's not going to change quickly. It's going to be a long time struggle. The other thing that I've learned working with this now for the past 5 years is our story does matter. When I sit down with legislators, and I will show up in a suit, like an actual suit. This is California business casual. I don't know if it flies out here, but this is about as formal as I get normally. But when I'm in the legislature, I wear an actual suit with a tie and the whole bit. And usually I'll sit there and I'll start talking about what we do and all that kind of stuff. And somewhere in the conversation, I'll say, and I benefited from these programs because I was in prison for 38 years. And I inevitably get the, what? And immediately they have a different level of attention to what I'm saying, because they know I'm talking to them from actual experience of how these programs really work. I represent now 4 different programs that I participated in while I was in prison. I represent 106 total, but all of those programs, so I can say, this is what those programs did to me. This is how those programs actually changed my life. This is how those programs made me able to come out of prison and live a good life and be a successful member of society. The other thing I didn't mention was when I initially came in, I also raised money for my salary, so that makes it easier. And also changing transformative in-prison works. I raised it from a nonprofit that ultimately paid my salary. There are nonprofits that are willing to help pay people salaries in other nonprofits, particularly people with direct experience. When I came in, changing TPW as it was to TPW as it is now, it wasn't like we all just got together and had a big hug and said, hey, this is great, let's do that. There was a lot of difficult conversations, a lot of unpleasant meetings, a couple of people quit, but It is what it is. But, as I said, we've had tremendous victories. We've had a lot of good things have come from these victories. I think the system is better off for the result of what we put the work into. But it has not always been easy. There has been struggles. There has been unpleasant days. But as I often say, when some of this was going on, people say, how bad is that for you? And I was like, well, I don't think anyone was going to stab me, so I'm not too worried about it too much. So, as opposed to prison, right? So this is my favorite picture of all. And that picture right there, that picture is 85 years of incarceration. That's 4 people who all did time. And that is us coming out of where we had just finished advocating for the bill that changed the meaning of prison. And it passed on this floor of the Senate before it went to the governor. Those are my closest friends. These are people that I love and care about. And the young woman who no one would ever imagine she did time, she's a PhD student at USC. She works for a men now that does the international work with prisons and stuff. The next guy out, he runs Southern California Defy Industries, which teaches people how to open businesses and how to become successful entrepreneurs when they get out of prison. And the guy on the far end was a juvenile life without parole in California. Came in when he was 17 years old. We actually did time together on the same yard. I've known him since he was like 21 or something, and a kid. And he now manages a large reentry facility in Los Angeles that transforms lives every day. And these are all people who at one point society had said, you don't matter and we don't really want you around. So, and we managed to change the law to the better. And this is one of my favorite quotes of all time. And it's from Alan Simpson. For those of you who don't know who Alan Simpson was, he was a very conservative Republican senator from Wyoming. Rather than serving in the US Senate for almost 20 years or having so many other wonderful life experiences, I could have served a longer sentence in prison for some of the stupid, reckless things I did as a teenager. And I think, there was a time when people would say, there but for the grace of God go I. None of us should be judged by the worst thing we ever did in our lives. I think Brian Stevenson says that. I tell people all the time, the way I say it is like we're all capable of being better than our worst moments. I have to believe that because my worst moments were pretty bad, and I think I'm a lot better than my worst moments. And I believe that about other human beings too. Honestly, I did not know this was a law school I would be speaking at until like yesterday. I just thought it was this Northeastern University. I didn't realize it was the law school for some reason. Maybe I missed that in the communications or something. So I assume there are some people in here who plan to become lawyers, or people who probably are lawyers. What can you do now? I would say we need lawyers too. I don't want to come out of this people going, well, the only people that should be doing this are people who are in prison. Certainly not saying that at all. We need lawyers. We need good lawyers. We need lawyers that are willing to come in and say this system needs work and fixing. And we need people who know how to do that, because I'm not a lawyer, and I did play a lawyer in prison for a while, but it was a very unpleasant experience. So I don't envy your position being a lawyer sometimes, but we do need lawyers, and we need people who are willing to come in and help us with the stuff that we're trying to change. And we need people in general beyond lawyers who are willing to go against, this idea that people go to prison because they're evil. People don't go to prison because they're evil. People go to prison because they did bad stuff, generally. That doesn't mean they're bad. It means they did bad stuff. And they should be treated like human beings, because everybody should be treated like a human being no matter what. In Norway, you all may remember there was a guy, I can't remember his name off the top of my head right now, but he killed about 70 some people on an island. Breivik, that's his name, yeah. That guy. So he killed a mass number of people. He did it because they were socialists, and he's kind of a radical, kind of Nazi-like, lunatic fascist. And when he went to prison in Norway, and I spoke to the guy who designed the Norwegian model, and he said he met with his friends. He also set some bombs off in Oslo. This guy that helped create the Norwegian prison system was injured by one of those bombs. He was in the hospital. So this was like a horrible thing, really terrible thing. And he said to the people, run the prison system, he said, this is our greatest test. can we treat him like a human being? And they do. And I mean, I have to say, it's a pretty amazing thing. So they can't put him in the general population because they're pretty confident somebody would kill him, which I can imagine that would happen in a prison in America too. So what they do is they hire people to come in to be his friend and talk to him. And those people usually only last about 6 months or so before they go, ugh, I don't want to do that anymore. But they hire people to because they believe no human being should be isolated and not have somebody to talk to. He lives the same as everybody else. He lives in a decent housing unit. He can't do stuff with everybody else, but other than that, he lives in a decent housing unit. He is treated fairly because he's a human being. Not because, necessarily Anders Breivik is his name. That's his name. Yep. Not necessarily, because he deserves to be treated well. That's not really the question. But he's a human being, and all human beings should be treated like human beings. And the people who treat people not like human beings, they actually suffer as bad as the people who are being mistreated. Prison guards in the United States lifespan is like 10 years less than the average person. I mean, it may be more than that. I can't remember the exact number, but it is a terrible experience for them too. So I think we need people to get involved in this to help make it better. Very quickly, that's my current girlfriend, and I just say I have a pretty good life out there. So, that right there, that group right there. So, I call her my apprentice, which she would probably blush if I said that if she was here. But she's 24 years old, and she's from Egypt originally, and her family has been involved with incarceration in Egypt. And I said to her, why aren't you trying to work on the prisons in Egypt? She said, well, in Egypt, they kill you if you try to change the prisons. I said, okay, that's fair. So she lives in Santa Cruz. She went to UC Santa Cruz. Lovely young woman. She's kind of like my aide and stuff and all that, and we're good friends, and I like her a lot. And then the other three all did time, and that's our Trusted Messengers group, and we're working to expand that to more and more people. So what we're doing is these are the people who got out recently. We're teaching them how to lobby, how to talk to the leaders, how to tell their stories in a way that's really effective and useful, that can change things. We're very proud of that right there. I think it's a good thing. So I think that's the last thing. Thank you for listening to me. And I'm going to do one last thing, and that is if anybody's interested in my book, you can click on that QR code. It'll take you to my book. So, and I think I'm going to return it to Michael. Did you want to questions?
Yes.
I think Michael wants to ask me questions. I hope I'm not going to get cross-examined. That's all.
Well, before questions, just a couple of things. First of all, anybody who really wants one of his books and are allowed to put your name in that bag, and after the question period, we will draw some winners. And the second thing is I just want to say that we're only here today because of Deb and Jen and Margaret, who is Margaret here?
Yep.
There she is, who actually paid the freight.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, so you want me to play moderator or
However you all want to do it.
questions? Let's have some
Anyone like
questions.
I have Calvin, who I now met in person for the first time, and I've known him for quite some time.
I'd be derelict in my duty if I didn't ask this question, but, my name's Calvin Airy, and I'm formerly incarcerated. And I volunteer, I'm affiliated with the prison book program. We send books to prisoners. But the question is, was there a particular book that you read when you were in prison that had a transformative impact?
Yes, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
That's the same book that I read. I still have that book. It was given to me in 1973
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
Viktor Frankl.
I mean, what got me about that book more than anything was when he describes the experience of people in the Nazi death camp in Auschwitz, and he says there were people who rose above it, and there were people who fell apart. And the difference fundamentally was the people who rose above it had something they believed they wanted to live for. And I was in prison. I was doing life without the possibility of parole. I had no expectation I would ever get out of prison. I mean, I was the second person to get out who had been sentenced as an adult with life without parole in California. We both were commuted on the same day. Another guy's he currently lives in Indiana, I think. No one sentenced as an adult. I was 19 when I came in. I was an adult. No one had gotten out of prison with life without parole in over 30 years. And Governor Brown decided, for reasons that one can only imagine, I suppose, but he decided he wanted to think about commuting people's sentences. And for some reason, again, I'm not sure how it happened, but my name ended up in the possible contenders, and me and Danny Wiltsey both got commuted, and I got out. He commuted me on April 15th, 2017, which was yesterday, 8 years, and then I got out on December 20th, 2017. But when I read that book, it was sort of what it told me is that I didn't have to succumb to what was going on. I could become better than that. And it truly changed my life. And I owe a great debt of gratitude to Viktor Frankl, as well as many other people. It's a life-changing book. I think everyone should read it.
Well, I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, so you describe a very series of incredibly positive things going on in California.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, if I were to kind of sample the national media or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, California would be full of gang warfare and violence in every prison. It's not working. Get rid of the liberals, et cetera, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So, is that part in changing that? Is that part of your mandate in any way? Do you think there's something you can do there, or that should be done, or what should other people be doing, et cetera?
I mean, that's a good question, and it's a really tough thing to deal with. You all probably have heard, and if you haven't, I can summarize relatively quickly. During the pandemic, there was a rise in mostly minor property crimes in California, primarily people shoplifting in CVS's and places like that, and some car break-ins in the Bay Area. It got a lot of media attention, I think, because people were bored and there was not much else for them to cover. And then right after the pandemic ended, there was like this rash of these like group sort of running into places and breaking with, display cases and running out with stuff. These were really isolated incidences, but the media really pounced on it. And I think that my theory is that there are people in the world who don't want to see change in the criminal justice system, who like it the way it is, who benefit from it being the way it is. And I think they've basically funded and amplified some of these stories to make it feel like California is in some complete collapse into chaos, which is completely not true. I lived in Southern California when I got out. I now live in Sacramento, the state capital. I mean, we do have a homeless problem. It is expensive to live in California. And it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it's not falling apart, and the prison system, to get Governor Newsom's credit, he has instituted real change, and I believe that things are changing. They are not perfect, and there's a long way to go. But I think, fear is such a great motivator of people, and without getting too deep into the weeds, but I think we all know what I'm talking about. It seems to have gripped us a bit in this country, and I just feel like we have to not give in to that. And what was it Franklin Roosevelt said? The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And I think that I'm not afraid. I think we're going to be fine personally. I think we just have to weather some unfortunate stuff. But California is not falling apart. The prison system is not chaos and gang warfare. It's not perfect. It's a prison system, but it's not that bad.
Is there a question online?
Yeah, we do have a question online.
Oh,
It says, for people who have not been incarcerated and are non-lawyers, what are some concrete actions they can take now to be helpful and effective allies? How can they lift up these efforts, and how can Massachusetts folks get involved?
I'll take the first two questions, and I'll let the third question go to one of my Massachusetts friends. But I mean, as far as how can people be helpful? I mean, everywhere you go, anywhere you are, there are organizations that are trying to make the prison system better. There are organizations that are trying to help people inside. There are people who need help. There are people who need help with reentry. There are people who need help with substance abuse problems. There are people who need help with legal problems. I think any one of those things, I'm sure if you contact one of these organizations in any state, I'm sure Massachusetts has plenty of them, they can lead you and direct you to places where you might want to volunteer to join. How can we lift up these efforts? I mean, I think the most important thing is we talk to our friends, we vote. you know, against some of the crazy stuff that's been going on, unfortunately. You know, and we talk to people and we are open about how we think things can change. But as far as what's going on in Massachusetts,
Ask Professor Ramirez.
Professor Ramirez.
So in Massachusetts, we've created a statewide, state-funded reentry network that's comprehensive. So I believe we're the only state in the country that has it right now. We have 18 offices and a budget of $33 million. So for every person coming out of prison or jail in Massachusetts, whether they came out 10 minutes ago or 10 years ago, whether they came out federally, whether they came out state, on probation, on parole, or they're wrapped up and standing by themselves, they can all get free services, programs at community justice support centers, which are part of our probation and court system. So for people who want to get involved, we need a lot of volunteers, including law students and lawyers to take care of civil legal things, but we do provide housing, we do provide substance use disorder. At every center, there's a reentry coordinator, a jobs coordinator, and a public benefits coordinator hardwired into the public benefits system, so someone can come in and get their SNAP, their SSI, their SSI. I wondered if you compared that system to what we have in other states. The reason we created it is because we, like every state, have a patchwork of uncoordinated reentry centers differing in efficacy, focus, and scope. They're doing God's work, but what helps us with a comprehensive system, as you said, prisoners who are behind the walls have a hard time getting information about reentry programs. This way there's one-stop shopping for people coming out of prison, and there's also one-stop shopping for people who want to give them jobs or services. So I wondered what you thought about that model.
I mean, it sounds fantastic.
Oh, and we also, I just want to say this.
Sure.
We have 18 reentry coordinators at each of the 18 offices, and 3 of them are people with lived experience.
Glad to hear they're giving jobs to people with experience. Amen to that. I mean, it sounds fantastic. I had a conversation with a couple of my friends who were telling me about this, and I think in California, I mean, I think this is a great model. I think it should be probably everywhere, and it should be state funded. I mean, the state should be funding these things, obviously. California's leaned on more of a nonprofit model.
Right.
So like there are a couple of organizations in California that sort of aggregate a lot of that information. And then in most of the parole offices, there's like a kiosk you can go to and access a lot of this kind of information too. You can get addresses and phone numbers and things like that, which I think would be a good thing to have in all the parole offices, have a kiosk that allows people to access. And I think, you know, obviously there needs to be more funding put into nonprofits, and also the state needs to put more money into what it's doing. At the end of the day, there needs to be more help with the reentry. There needs to be more funding putting into keeping people out of prison. There needs to be more entry into keeping people out of prison when they get out of prison. And where we live, our narrow space is, what do we do with people when they're in prison? Because, I mean, we often frame the stuff we did, transformative programming works that we represent, we call it pre-release. You know, like how do you develop the soft skills, the soft skills, I think I hate that term, but, you know, like have empathy, how to work with people, you know how to be in a group and be effective. You know, I think soft skills is a crappy name for it. It should be like the most important skills, you know, how to work with other human beings, the most important skill we all need. So, but I mean, I think, I love that. It sounds great. Sounds fantastic. It really does. Does anybody else want to ask anything?
What kind of programs inside a prison do you think make a difference?
What kind of programs inside prison do I think make a difference?
Or that help prepare men or women when they leave prison?
I mean, so that's a great question, and I've been asked that question by legislators often, like, which are the programs that really work? And my answer always is, there's no one program that works for everybody, and I think that many different things have huge impacts on human beings. In California, we have a lot of dog training programs. People love the dog training programs. They're easy to raise money for because people love dogs. Just so happens that some guys in the joint are actually doing some work with them, but you know, they love the dogs. And those have magical, transformative powers on people. But I've also seen programs that are like very insight oriented. We have an organization called GRIP, Guiding Rage into Power, really big organization in California. And they have a year-long curriculum that is very much insight-oriented. It's about accountability. It's about understanding your own life and how do you become a better human being. It's another huge, successful program. But I mean, I would say, I think an art program can transform somebody's life. I think a writing program can transform somebody's life. I think education, I think anything that is oriented at helping someone get to know themselves better, be able to work in the world better, could be that one program that changes their life, which is why I think what we describe it as is creating a rehabilitative ecosystem, which in California, the picture I showed earlier of, where is it? There, San Quentin. San Quentin is now the San Quentin Rehabilitation Center, it has been designated. And they are creating a lot of things there. But one of the things that the advantage of San Quentin is it's in the Bay Area. It's surrounded by a lot of liberal people. And they have literally thousands of volunteers that go in and out of that prison every year. And they have so many programs that people have to figure out how many programs they can take in their schedule. We believe every prison should be like that. The woman who is currently the director of the Division of Rehabilitative Programs in CDCR, her name is Amy Casillas. She does a wonderful job. She's really been a hugely transformational person. She says one size fits one. And I think that's the idea. I really love that, right? One size fits one. So I think there's a lot of things, but.
I just want to say, I remember, I did a ton of time in Massachusetts, and, the thing about getting out takes like 5 minutes, you sign the paper, you walk out the door, but all these things that I had in my head, like what I wanted to accomplish, and I was to answer your question, the program, it was incredible. It was like, where do I see myself in 5 years? Where do I see myself in 1 year? Where do I see myself in 3 months? And to be able to write all that stuff down and talk to somebody about, okay, this is where I want to be, I had a son out there, I wanted to get custody, things like that, but things just don't happen. Get a job, there's a lot of things that go on, but to be able to concretely come up with ideas, where do I see myself in this many years, and have somebody say, okay, these are the things, and these are the contacts you need to, make in order to get to those goals. It was really helpful, which I didn't have the first time I had control, So I thought that was just something that came along, and it really helped me make that transition this time. I've been out 23 years now.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah.
Good. Well, I hope they're talking to you about how to stay out.
Yeah, I'm trying to get off parole. Massachusetts, unfortunately, has a pretty strict policies about staying on parole, so I'm trying to get my parole terminated finally, but it's a tough thing,
Yeah. Well, congratulations.
Yeah.
Right behind you, Calvin, there's a woman. Then you got Calvin.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, Malcolm X said in his book that, people don't realize that a person's whole life can be changed by just one book.
Mhm.
And that book you mentioned and affected my life too. I just wanted to mention 6 weeks ago, the prison book program, as a result of donors' help, we ordered $500 worth of Man's Search for Meaning and Yes to Life, another by Viktor Frankl, from Beacon Press right here in Boston. That publishes it.
Nice.
And hopefully it's going to have an impact on a few more people.
It's amazing. I'm so impressed by that. And I'm so impressed that Mother California is a part of that program too. Thank you. Please.
I just want to highlight my students. My students did a project with Justice for Housing, which is a program that works with individuals who are recently leaving the cultural system and trying to achieve housing stability. They created a guide. And one of the things that the students gave as a recommendation was before people leave the prison system, that they actually, all of the things that will help them achieve housing and also think about all the other things in their life, they get holistic help. So like a 6-month period prior, just understanding, okay, here are the things I need so that I can get public housing. Here are the things that I need to think about for my quarry. Here are the things I need to think about and actually mapped out sort of a training what that could look like. And they did that based on their experiences working with organizations that's primarily, actually completely run by individuals who are so it was just an amazing experience. And if anybody wants to do any work with Justice for Housing, they're also doing some work around being formerly incarcerated, being a protected class. And what does that mean in Massachusetts? So, I think the students really did a fantastic job.
Were these your students?
Yeah.
I can imagine that you're old enough to have students, but okay. I mean, as you're talking, I'm thinking, did you say they're your students? Anyway, that sounds like a great program, though, it really does. Thanks.